Coming up on Network Africa. 4 protesters killed in gunfire in the Sudanese city of Omdurman as anti-government demonstrations continue. A 4-person tests positive for Ebola in the city of Goma in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Plus, Zimbabwe accuses the United States of fanning divisions after travel sanctions were imposed on its ambassador to Tanzania. Hello and a warm welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. At least 4 protesters have been killed and many more injured by gunfire in the Sudanese city of Omdurman as hundreds of thousands take to the streets to pile pressure on the country's military rulers. Organizers had called for a 1 million-person march in cities across Sudan in response to the killing of young protesters in El Obeid, southwest of the capital Khartoum, earlier this week. Sudan has been gripped by months of political turmoil that led to the overthrow of longtime leader Omar al-Bashir in April. Protesters have kept up their rallies since then, pressing the army to hand over to civilians, accusing the security services of violence and decrying the shortages of economic hardships that triggered the unrest in the first place. Libya's Interior Minister, Fathi Bashaga, has announced plans to shut down 3 of the country's largest migrant detention centers in Misrata, Tajura and Homs. This announcement comes after criticism that migrants were being returned to the Tajura detention center, which had been hit by a missile in July, leading to the death of more than 20 migrants held there. The center is also close to the fighting between the UN-recognized government in the capital, Tripoli, and the Benghazi-based Libyan National Army, which has vowed to take over the city. However, organizations that monitor the situation in Libya fear that these closures may lead to the remaining centers becoming even more overcrowded and also the possibility of many migrants being left in the hands of traffickers. In East Africa, a 4th person has tested positive for Ebola in the city of Goma in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The latest case is the wife of a man who died on Wednesday. At least one of their children also tested positive. Goma is a large trading city on the border with Rwanda, and the first case there in July prompted the World Health Organization to declare the outbreak an emergency of international concern. Meanwhile, Rwanda has reopened its border with the Democratic Republic of Congo, where an Ebola outbreak has killed more than 1,800 people in the past year. The border was closed for several hours after the confirmation of a 3rd case of Ebola in the Congolese city of Goma, where 2 people had already died. But in a presentation transmitted via video directly from the Democratic Republic of Congo, the United Nations Ebola Emergency Response Coordinator, David Gressley, says it is harmful to close the borders.
But Ebola is a little bit special because just one person not being vaccinated and then being infected can seed the virus everywhere else. So we really need 100% acceptance. So it's not acceptance of the vaccine. What we do struggle with is acceptance of being identified as a high-risk contact. So yes, we find all the contacts we think we know of, but there are people who hide their illness, who flee, who go to another place, who think that being taken to the Ebola treatment center is like being taken to the death house, which I have to say is really quite extraordinary when you go to the Ebola treatment centers and you see what an incredibly high standard of care there is and how there's enormous humanity. They really do their utmost to look after people in a very caring and special way. They keep a survivor in the room at all times with the person who has Ebola so that they know they have someone who really understands what they're going through.
Now, the UN official in Somalia, James Swan, says prospects for lasting peace in Somalia will be improved if young people feel represented. The special rep of the UN Secretary General for Somalia was speaking with young activists from across the country as a 2-day youth empowerment and engagement dialogue in which they discussed how best to help youth participate actively in political processes. This includes the ongoing constitutional review process, national reconciliation dialogue, and preparations for national elections in 2020. Somalia has one of the youngest populations in the world. Experts believe that the active participation of youth in decision-making processes is vital for the country's stability.
I think prospects for lasting peace in Somalia will be improved if young people feel represented, if they participate in political life, if they have a say in national political dialogue, and ultimately show their stake and involvement in the country's future. We look forward to hearing some of your...
Zimbabwe has accused the United States of fanning divisions after travel sanctions were imposed on its ambassador to Tanzania, an ex-presidential guard who allegedly commanded troops who killed 6 civilians in a post-election protest last year. Anselm Sanyetwe is the first Zimbabwean official to be put on the U.S. sanctions list since Robert Mugabe was forced to step down as president in November 2017. The diplomat and his wife are now barred from traveling to the United States. The U.S. says it has credible information that Mr. Sanyetwe was involved in the violent crackdown on August 1st, 2018, and that the government of Zimbabwe has held no member of the security forces accountable for the acts of violence. Meanwhile, Zimbabwe's worsening electricity shortages have effectively turned night into day for many businesses and families, with most work happening after dark when lights flicker on for a few hours. The southern African country is producing just half of its 1,700 megawatt peak demand, the result of a prolonged drought that has reduced output at its largest hydro plant and aging coal-fired generators that keep breaking down.
Around 9 p.m., a siren usually pierces the pitch-black night at the Willowville Industrial Park in Zimbabwe, signaling that power has been restored after a day-long outage. Moments later, men in blue overalls walk into a factory and begin shoveling a mound of gypsum into a drawing machine to make wall plaster.
A tough time indeed, because we're having to only operate during the night where there's availability of power. Our factory here consumes a lot of electricity, and with the challenges that the country is facing at the current moment of lack of electricity and some serious load shedding, long hours, we are forced to do our production in the evenings.
The power cuts have cost manufacturers more than $200 million in lost production since June. This is according to the Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries and Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce. But it is small firms such as Moses Chipurora's plaster factory, which provide much-needed employment in a country with a jobless rate above 90%, that bear the brunt of the outages. Before the power cuts, the plants produced about 20,000 bags of wall plaster a month. Production has now dropped to below 7,000 bags, but he still pays his 24 employees their full salaries, even though they only work 6 hours some nights.
Running a plant of this magnitude on diesel, an expensive fuel commodity, it definitely means I'm going to be forced to put up my price. But the fact that the general consumer as well is probably also suffering the same predicament, the product ends up being costly and they won't be able to afford it.
For families, it is the same. 32-year-old Cynthia Chabweno is a mother of 4 young children. By the time the lights come on at her modest home in Hatcliffe Township on the outskirts of Harare, they are all fast asleep, and she has a few hours to complete the household chores.
This is a huge strain. Power comes late in the night when I'm supposed to be sleeping and resting. But I have to wake up and do household chores like fetching water and ironing. It's unbearable.
Zimbabwe's only immediate hope to ease the electricity crisis lies in imports. The government on Tuesday said it had started importing 300 megawatts from a regional power pool.
Here in Nigeria, former Vice President Atiku Abubakar is calling for an independent inquiry into the report by the Wall Street Journal of secret graveyards maintained by the military in Borno State. The US-based publication had reported yesterday that at least 1,000 soldiers killed by Boko Haram insurgents were buried, in hidden graveyards, most of them without the knowledge of family members. The military has denied the report, describing it as sacrilegious. In a statement, the Director of Defense Information, Colonel Onyeman Wachuku, said the author of the report was uninformed. But in his reaction, the former vice president expressed shock that such a thing could happen under a democratic government, describing it as a national emergency. Part of his statement reads, quote, "The men and women of our armed forces are our first, second and last defense against our domestic and foreign enemies and should be treated with love, respect, dignity and appreciation for the invaluable service they render to Nigeria," end of quote. He asked the federal government to get to the root of the matter by forming a judicial commission of inquiry to investigate it, as well as a team of former military officers to assess and report to Nigerians the true state of the ongoing war on terror in the northeast. Let's get more on this story from security expert David Otto, who joins us live from London. Thank you for joining us on the program. David, first of all, what do you make of the military's reaction to this story? The Nigerian army says the report is sacrilegious and the author is uninformed. Is this good enough for you?
I think this is a very dangerous allegation, and it requires that the Nigerian military carries out an investigation to find out where this information is coming from. Because, as you very much know, the army relies on the mental and physical capacity. That is what determines the morale of the soldiers. And this kind of information that is coming out would be a disaster to the soldiers on the front line if this is true. But I don't see how the military would actually decide to bury soldiers, in such a manner without carrying out the traditional ceremonies. So I think this story has much more to it than actual facts. So I think it's up to the military now to carry out a judicial investigation to determine where this information is coming from.
Yeah, David, if this report is not thoroughly investigated and proven to be false, what impact is it likely to have on the morale of soldiers at the forefront of the battle against Boko Haram?
Of course, the military, relies a lot on the morale of its soldiers. Recently, the Chief of Army Staff has been talking about the soldiers needing more morale in the war front. And these kind of allegations that have been published will definitely have an impact. But the soldiers, know much more than you and I what is happening on ground. They would be the ones who would have witnessed the professional burial or unprofessional burial of their soldiers, of their fellow comrades. So I think that this is something which, in a very, very short while, an investigation would give us a better idea. But I believe that if the soldiers, were witnessing this kind of behavior, then a lot of them would abandon their arms, and leave, because nobody wants to see their comrade, in the war front, treated as such. So I think there's much investigation that needs to be done, to this effect.
Yeah, definitely. I hope we will see that investigation. Security expert David Otto, thank you so much for speaking to us on Network Africa.